Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Brattleboro Selectboard meeting of Tuesday, July 9th. We began at 5:15 for some committee interviews. Then we had an executive session, which ran a little long, and somebody needed to get a cup of tea. So my apologies for us starting a little late tonight. John, was this meeting properly warned?
Yes, Daniel, it was.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Yep.
First order of business is to approve minutes. We have minutes from June 13th and June 18th to approve. Any discussion on that? Richard?
There's a few very minor spelling and grammar changes in it, but I don't want to waste the time here, so if I can just pass them on to John and,
How minor are they?
you know, like an extra Z and then another word and.
Okay. Does that sound
Yeah.
okay to the board?
Yep.
Okay.
I had a few similar from Franz.
Okay. Minor grammatical and spelling changes in the minutes. Any other discussion? Franz?
Yes, I do have two somewhat more substantive changes. On the minutes from June 18th, on page 11 of the packet, in line 16, there's a statement attributed to me, which I think it's incomplete. And as written, it says Reichman wants to reduce staff.
Yeah.
And I would like that to be replaced by something like Reichman advocated looking for cost savings, perhaps by reducing staff, which I think more closely reflects what I was actually saying.
Mm-hmm. That's my recollection of it. Can we do that? That is something that the board is happy to accommodate? Revision?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
You all.
Any other discussion on these minutes?
There's one other pretty minor thing, which later on it says on line 45 on the same page, Reichman said it doesn't have to be a thorough ordinance. And I think what I said was it doesn't have to be through an ordinance.
Yeah,
So it just was,
Okay.
got transcribed
Yeah.
incorrectly. So
Okay.
that's a pretty minor one.
yeah.
The other one's more substantive.
Okay, great. So we got some amended minutes here. Do I have a motion? Elizabeth?
I move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Okay. Liz made a motion to approve the minutes of June 13th and June 18th, 2024 as amended. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye, 5-0, that passes. Okay, moving on to chair's remarks. I have none. Manager's comments.
I too have a few. So first of all, I want to start out tonight by thanking Knowles Wentworth and Kira Rideout for the outstanding work that they are doing for the town as liaisons with HCRS and the police department. Also, a big thanks to the police department personnel and fire and EMS personnel for their actions related to the recent homicide on Flat Street. Particularly want to call out the excellent and rapid apprehension of a suspect by the police, as well as the great job that the fire EMS staff did managing a critical scene. Very grateful for that. Final gratitude tonight to the 4th of July committee, to Carol Lalott and the Rec and Parks team for another great parade and park event, and also to DPW for the quick work they did that morning cleaning up the graffiti that was written throughout the parade route. A few announcements beginning Monday, July 15th. A contractor will be replacing the southern section of sidewalk on Western Ave from Edward Heights to Greenleaf Street. And this work is expected to take several weeks from mid-July. Crews will be working between 6:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. There will be no on-street parking in that section during this project, and motorists should expect heavy delays in the area, and we advise them to seek alternate routes. Bicyclist and pedestrian traffic should use caution within the work zone and seek alternate routes as well. Temporary walking paths will be established where necessary. If you have any questions about this, please contact Highway Superintendent Darren Pacheco at DPW. Ballots for the August 13th state primary election are now available by request. Voters can request an absentee ballot on their My Voter page or by calling or emailing the town clerk's office, or you can pick up an absentee ballot, but for yourself only by visiting the town clerk's office, which is at 230 Main Street. Additionally, voters may now vote early in person at the town clerk's office whenever we have two officials present. The election will be held on Tuesday, August 13th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at the American Legion. I want to remind everyone about the Fuller Park Estyville Common Community Forum, which is scheduled for tomorrow night, Wednesday, July 10th, with a rain date of Thursday, July 11th, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. The Summer Arts in the Park series begins tonight at the Brattleboro Common at 7 p.m. Don't think we'll be done by then, but that is going to run for 4 weeks on Tuesday evening. So hopefully people will get a chance to catch the Summer Arts in the Park series. For a schedule of the musical performers, please go to the town website at brattleboro.gov. And finally, Carol Lalott wanted me to let you all know that we are still taking registrations for summer camps and programs, and you can register in person at the Rec and Parks office or online at brattleboro.gov. That's it.
Great, thanks, John. Other select board members or select board members with comments and/or committee reports? Franz?
Thank you, Daniel. I would like to just expand briefly on one of John's remarks and throw in a tip of the hat to Brattleboro Goes Forth for helping organize the 4th of July parade, which they've done so many years now, and it continues to be a really great event for our town. So thank you to Brattleboro Goes Forth and Kevin O'Connor in particular.
Thank you. Other select board members with comments or committee reports? Okay, seeing none, moving on to public participation. So this is the part of the agenda where the public are invited to speak on things that are not on the agenda. We limit public participation to 3 minutes maximum per person in order to allow for fairness. And people who want to speak should raise their hand. If they're on Zoom, they can raise their special Zoom hand. And they'll be recognized in some order of my choosing. And when you come up to the microphone, just say your name and where you live would be fine, okay? So, anyone wish to speak in public participation about something that is not on tonight's agenda? Ms. O'Connor. Or to pull something from the consent agenda. Thanks, John.
I'm not going to do that. Kate O'Connor, Brattleboro, and I am here with my sister, Carrie, and my nephew, David, because we, along with my brother, Kevin, my two nephews, David, Daniel and Jacob, and my brother-in-law, Bob, we want to thank everybody who helped us organize the 4th of July parade. We've been doing this now since 2010. It's hard to believe. And we started because the Chamber of Commerce decided it was just too much for them to do, which is totally understandable. And when nobody else stood up to do it, my father said, the O'Connor family's going to do it. We thought he was nuts because we had never organized a parade before in our lives. But a 4th of July parade was everything to him. He loved community. He loved everybody getting together. So, of course, we all did it. So we're 14 years in, and we do want to thank the town staff who helped us. We want to thank all the people that made financial contributions. We want to thank the people that were in the parade, and we want to thank everybody that came out to it. And I can say David's not going to like this. He just graduated from high school, and he's already a professional parade organizer, and he's going to be the 3rd generation, along with my other 2 nephews who are going to take over. But thank you so much to everybody. We sincerely appreciate all the support.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks to everybody else. Okay, other members of the public who wish to speak. Penny. That's okay.
I know I've only got 3 minutes.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to just...
Penny, would you just, I know I said Penny, but would you mind kind of just introducing yourself for people that don't know you?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, my name's Penelope Wilner, and I own Penelope Were in downtown Brattleboro. So I came this evening because there are a couple of issues that I just wanted to check and find out whether you had answers for. So I'm going to read this.
Okay.
What has held up the placement of cameras in the center of town? This was voted on last autumn.
If you want to go through the whole thing.
I'll go through the
yeah,
whole thing.
I'm writing them
Sure,
down.
Yeah. Have we reached any final decisions on the public toilet debate? May I suggest that we take a look at public toilets that require an admission for entry, you know, like they do at Victoria Station, where you have to put money in? Because I know it's always been a problem to work out how we can keep the wrong people out of them. And you can get ones now that that kind of wash themselves out, which have a wash system in there. And I wondered if it was something that we might be able to try to raise money for, or just get a grant for, because we really do need public toilets. I must get asked probably 3 or 4 times a day, where is the public toilet? I know there's one right on the corner near me, but people don't normally want to go into, one of those porta cabins, although wouldn't be offering them anything much more than a porta cabin if we did have public toilets. So that's one of the questions, and we have been debating this now for a really long time, I think. The other thing is, thanks. The bike stands have been installed, but could I suggest that maybe we do it a little earlier on in the year next year, because it is the middle of July almost now, and I think we've been asking for them since April, because, people start biking much sooner than just now to get here. And having the bike stands outside, particularly outside for me, because I have taken over the pavement, which is probably rather rude of me, to put my furniture on it. A lot of times people come and they put their bicycles onto the place where I put my furniture, because I have it right by the sort of pipes that go up in front of the store. So that's become an issue. Now, the last but not least, and this is really the most important issue, is would the Selectboard be prepared to revisit the discussion on banning panhandling and nuisance in at least the center of town? I have a lengthy letter that I've written on this topic, and I'm happy to return on another occasion, or I can submit it in writing, whichever way you would like me to deal with it. But in my opinion, this has become a real kind of crisis issue, not from the perspective necessarily. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's an awful issue to have to be talking about, because we want to be sympathetic, but it's really affecting our downtown economy. My sales have dropped significantly this year, and that's from lack of attendance. And I just think this is a really important topic, and at some point you have to start thinking about what's the most important, what is the most important thing for Brattleboro? Because I know that we have a very charitable instinct towards the homeless and the alcohol and drug abusers in this town, but in the end, it's actually, we're sort of defeating the purpose of helping them. Do you know what I mean?
Thanks, Penny. That's
Yeah.
4.5 minutes, so I'm going to ask you to wrap
all
it
right.
up there.
I'm wrapping up. And
Thank you.
And I did have a few things to say on the parking meters too, but I think that's coming up later.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So you're heard. I had 4 concerns there. There's a letter that you're referencing. Please just send it to us. You can email it to all of us and include the town manager's office as well. That'd be great. Cameras, we have spoken about a couple of times because we've had the same inquiry. If there's any update to give or a reiteration of where that process stands, that would be great.
Well, I do know that the electrical lines have been installed for the camera, and Camera's been ordered. We expect it to be delivered any day.
Okay.
It will be installed soon after that. So
Great.
it's imminent.
Thank you, John. And just so folks know, in this part of the meeting, when people raise issues, we don't really dive into them substantively because the public have not been warned that this is a matter that the board will be discussing. And so it wouldn't be fair for us to take action on it when the people don't know that that's something that's coming up. So you're heard, and hopefully we'll get the cameras in pretty soon. Any other members of the public that would wish to speak on something that's not on tonight's agenda? Okay, don't see any hands in the room, don't see any hands on Zoom. So then we will move on to the consent agenda. John, would you mind briefly summarizing what we have on it tonight?
Yes, Daniel, there are 5 items on consent tonight. If you approve this agenda, you will be approving a second and third class liquor license for the Retreat Farm at 45 Farmhouse Square, and a tobacco substitute endorsement permit for SKJ Sales 2 Corporation at 328 Marlborough Road. You will be approving purchase of a DPW VersaVac vacuum truck from Tri-County Contractor Supply of West Springfield, Mass. for $497,893.40. You'll be awarding the annual propane bid to LNG Propane of Keene, New Hampshire for a 2-year contract at $1.369 per gallon. And you will be awarding a bid for consultant services to Cultural Planning Group of Melrose Park, Pennsylvania, in a lump sum in the amount of $47,170.
Great, thank you, John. Can I get a motion?
I'll motion
Yep.
that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Okay, Peter's made a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor, please raise their hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 5-0. Okay, moving on to old business. So, I feel like I'm catching up with myself today. Old business. Old business is preliminary consideration of 2025 state legislation priorities. And I want to stress preliminary. We actually tried to have this discussion twice. First, our goal-setting retreat, which was a few weeks back now. And the last time we met here, we also had it on our agenda, and we had to table it because of time constraints. So I'm going to ask John to kind of do some place setting in a second, but I think Select Board, it's important to recognize that this is preliminary. We're talking about potential priorities, and there's not a recommendation from the staff to advance any or all of these ideas. I think what would be helpful for town staff to hear about is like what we're excited about, what we're ready to champion at the state level. And I think it's also helpful to point out what we might think is missing from these. So John, anything additional to add?
Yeah, no, that's great, Daniel. So I guess maybe first I'll talk a little bit about where did this list come from. So earlier this year, or right around towards the end of the session, or after you did your last legislative agenda, I would say, I started to keep a list of every time someone said something to me like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did this or that? And if it involved a change to state legislation, I just put it down on this list. Not questioning it one way, not judging it one way or other, just putting it on the list. So like, as you remember, we had those conversations about Bridge 54. So like, that's one that got on here, like how do we solve that issue better? Different select board members or members of the public would talk to me about payments in lieu of taxes for county buildings, things like that, pilots for ways to grow our grand list. Let's see, I've had people talk to me about the SNAP distribution in town, in Vermont, really. Is that different from New Hampshire and Massachusetts? So it's somehow, it could be beneficial to change that. What else? Some things that the select board has talked about in their priorities, such as balancing out payments to the town for urban aid, given that we're handling a lot of the issues on a more regional basis, but Brattleboro taxpayers are paying for that. And then, of course, all of the public safety and public health issues that come up regularly around mental health reforms. David Gardenstein had a really good article in the paper that brought up a bunch of mental health reform issues, which I thought you might want to consider. There's been regular conversations around how do we address substance use disorders, and a number of issues there that kind of got grouped in that ones. And then there are a couple of small ones, like the issue we had with the Green Mountain Care Board and clarifying their jurisdiction, as well as the recent changes to the open meeting law, which may affect RTM in ways that the legislature didn't intend. So that's like a quick overview of some of the things that are on here. Some of these are probably more developed than others. I think really the best thing would be is if, like you said, Daniel, if there are some of these things that a select board member would like to champion or see it move forward, that's something that we could really concentrate effort with the legislative delegation who are planned to come visit you at your next meeting. So we could, and if I get a sense of the things that rise to the top here, I can put that in some sort of summary form for you to guide that conversation. So that was kind of, I guess, where I'd say I think we are in the process, if that's helpful. And yeah, I think that's about it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Okay, so I think it'd be really great if we could start with, what are we excited about from this list? So how about we start there? I saw a hand here. Are you ready to be excited about something?
I am very excited.
Okay.
Beginning with this transportation, I'll just go down the list. Beginning with the transportation funding, I really appreciate that I had my colleagues' support in telling VTrans that their payment that they assessed for us on Bridge 54 was not acceptable. And we went back to VTrans, and I appreciate that the staff worked with VTrans to get some answers about alternatives for our match payment. And so we can talk about that, and there's been some movement on that, which is great, and we can discuss with the legislature. But overall, it's a dreadful policy that they're really taking each municipality in Vermont to the cleaners with, there's no governor on their costs. I guess I'm making a pun out of the word governor. But there's runaway costs. They asked us to pay 3 times their original cost for this bridge. It went from $500,000 to $1.5 million, and they expected us to pay it without blinking an eye. And they're asking the same thing all over Vermont, and it's outrageous. And yes, I'm very excited about that. I would like to speak to the legislature about that.
Very good. So can I say that Liz is excited about VTrans project splits in general?
Yes, Bridge 54 and the VTran project splits in general.
Okay, very good. Other members of the board who would like to express excitement? France?
Thank you, Daniel, and you know how excitable I am.
I do.
So I just want to throw in that some of these could, I think, easily be grouped together in various ways. For example, some of them relate to additional funding for hub towns and the expenses that we face that other towns don't face. However, I'm not going to speak about that because I know Liz wants to.
Tell me which ones you're excited about.
Well, the one I'm really excited about, excited doesn't describe it, but the thing that I think is a really essential step for the legislature to take is a complete reassessment of the mental health needs of the people in Vermont, and the ways that we assess and treat and provide settings for those things to take place, sometimes even without the consent of the people who need to be evaluated in those ways. I do have some experience with that, and I know how difficult it can be, but if you the historical perspective that I see is that we made changes to mental health treatment in this country on a very widespread basis in the 1970s and 80s, and that the changes we made were premised on of the states to match their rhetoric with programs that would help people who need help. And I think that has to be evaluated from the ground up starting with very basic questions about what kind of treatment is needed and what circumstances it'll be provided in.
Great, thank you. Richard, Peter, excitement
Well,
or
just,
interest?
I would just support what Franz said,
Okay.
but also in relationship to the public safety and the public health issues that are outlined here, as well as the mental health and drug addiction, I would say this list is really good. I think all the important things are there, and so when we get the, I don't know, the state police, Jim Baker's report, when that is finalized and that will be presented to us at some future date, I think we should make sure that these pieces of mental health reform and drug addiction resources somehow are recognized and either become part of it or at least considered to make sure that these issues are addressed. I mean, part of what I'm getting at too is that although these are called legislative agenda items, I don't think we necessarily have to rely on the Vermont legislature to do a lot of the things we want to do. I really believe we could do them locally, and the basis for that may be the Baker report.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Just want to go to Peter first. unless
Yeah,
you-
I just want to make a comment about what Richard just said. And that, yes, we could do them locally, but they're very expensive. And so getting state funding and cooperation is so important.
Right, thanks. Peter?
Yeah, so far I don't, I'm not pulling any problem from any of the other select board members and what's getting them excited. I'll just throw in some community development and kind of taking a hard look at that and, taking steps forward to resolving our housing problem and kind of working towards that is something I'm looking forward to hearing more about and weighing in on.
Okay, great, thank you. Daniel, what do you think? Well, funny you should ask. The local option tax distribution to municipalities. So we have a 1% local option tax, but we actually don't receive 1% of those funds. We receive 70% of 1%, I believe. And that could maybe change. We could maybe receive 90%, or imagine even 100 of those local dollars that are spent here on our local option tax. So I think that's something that I would like us to take a deeper dive into.
And you're excited about it, Jim?
I'm moderately excited about it. Yeah, I'm not very hopeful, but I'm excited.
Why stop at 100%?
Why indeed? Elizabeth?
So as Franz gave you an advance warning, revenue sharing is what I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
And I'd like to address that when we have the opportunity to discuss it with the legislature.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's actually in a later agenda item as well, so we'll probably
Right.
talk more about it then.
Yeah.
Is there anything on this list that we are like, please do not pursue this?
I think it's a great list, and I don't see anything that I would take out. I would add one item to the community development number where we're talking about the SNAP distribution. I liked what John said about making sure that our benefits are exactly the same as in neighboring states, but also to make sure that the EBT cards are not transferable. Because, when there's a drug raid, there's a stack of EBT cards that are being bought and sold.
Okay. And all of these topics are like juicy, and we could dig into any of them, but really right now we're just identifying topics that we'd like to discuss with our state legislative delegation, which will be in a couple of weeks' time. So unless there's anything more that folks want to say, maybe we want to kick it open to the public for a minute. Go ahead, Richard.
Just a quick comment. It's a nice list, a couple of pages. Just going to get, what assurance do we have that we're actually going to follow up on the comments and the issues that people have? Is there some mechanism that at some future date looks back at this and says, okay, you didn't do this, you did this, I mean.
Yes.
How does
Yeah.
that?
So, this was a thing that we did for the first time last year, and we met with our state reps for Brattleboro plus the Wyndham County Senators 3 times, I think, or at least twice. You know, before the session, in the middle of the session, and I guess
This will be
the next meeting what we have with them will be the sort of after the session kind of review. And staff also put together memos on, you know, what was accomplished and what remained to be done. I think, you know, it would be helpful to have that context, right? Because there were things last year that were important that do still remain. So maybe if the next time we take a look at this, we could just get a reminder on topics that were important last year that remain unaccomplished. Many of these things will take a lot of work and maybe several years of work. Last dibs from the select board, and then we'll hear from the public.
Oh,
Elizabeth?
no, I'm fine.
Okay. Members of the public who wish to comment on this item, Mr. DeGray?
Dick DeGray, Brattleboro. A comment on your 1%. I believe all we need to do is to make a charter change, to have the language in our charter for us to collect the full 1%. I had made that suggestion to the charter committee, and if that's approved, then the town would collect the 1%. Right now, the reason that we pay 30% is because the state collects all of that money and then distributes it back to Brattleboro. And pilot programs are run with the money that they collect. Brattleboro was a beneficiary of some of that pilot money many, many years ago. But I think if you look into it, it would just be a charter change to allow us to collect. It has to be in your charter. And then our finance department would be responsible for collecting the 1%. And I'm not sure how that would work when you're working with companies outside of Brattleboro as we're collecting from Amazon. So it might be a kettle of fish that you don't want to get into. But be that as it may, having that opportunity to look at it. I do have a question for you. Under other, exemption for representatives, town meeting from S55, an act relating to open meeting law. Would you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, great. John?
Yeah, my understanding on S55 was that there are certain requirements that got changed in the open meeting law that apply to public bodies, but they do not apply to town meetings. So there were certain things that this bill made happen that do not affect town meetings across the state, except in one town, and that's Brattleboro, because the definition of how we do our town meeting is that it's a public body. So that's my general understanding of it. I think possibly Senator Hashim would address this at our next meeting. I know he realizes that there were some oversights in that, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Any other members of the public that would like to speak about this item? Okay, nobody on Zoom either. So, John, do you feel like you've got enough information?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much, David.
Good. So let's move along to the next item, which is new business. Item A, parking ordinance, first reading. We're going to make some changes to the Brattleboro Code of Ordinances, Chapter 16 and Appendix C, and I believe Patrick Morland's going to walk us through them.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Hello.
So this evening's discussion is a first reading of ordinance changes to Chapter 16 and to Appendix C. And I just want to remind everybody that no action is required of the board at this time at the first reading. If we move forward and at a second meeting, at a future meeting, the board could take action at that time. But for a first reading, no action is required. So I'll give you a general overview of the changes to Chapter 16, and then move on and do the same thing for Appendix C, and then finally, we can take a look at the fine and fee schedule. I learned earlier this morning that some of the board packets had the fine and fee schedule and some did not. So I placed a copy of those at your table. There's also another dozen or so here if anybody else wanted to take a look at those. So let's start with Chapter 16. There's a fairly significant rewrite that's been included in the board backup for Chapter 16. And while it may at first appear like there's a lot of changes, it's actually sort of the same change happening over and over again. And so it's really not as complicated as it might first appear. The primary change which is happening to Chapter 16 is the removal of the term parking meters. And that found itself riddled throughout the entire chapter. And what we've done is effectively replaced parking meters with metered parking areas. So it no longer refers to the device of a parking meter, but rather areas of town where metered parking exists. In addition to that, we've taken pains to remove all of the instances where, for example, it'll say, in Harmony Lot per hour it's this, and in this location per hour it's that. All that's been removed and been replaced by a reference to a fee and fine schedule, which is on your tables and prepared for you. There's some other small changes in Chapter 16. For example, there was reference made to the 1978 edition of the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. There's nothing particularly important about the 1978 edition. That document gets updated generally on an annual basis, and we would like to stay current with the organized thinking of road planning professionals as they evolve over time. So we've removed reference to that specific edition and replaced that with keeping up with the current schedule. In Appendix C, there's a whole different set of actions going on. Earlier when we met last month to talk about the parking budget, we spoke about a sort of a multi-departmental review of the parking system that included all sorts of folks within Public Works and Planning and Parking and Town Manager's Office and Finance, et cetera. In addition to the changes that we discussed in the project planning that we discussed last month, we also came across certain areas of town where we think it might be better to remove that from the metered parking area. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One of which is on Canal Street, adjacent to the Brattleboro Food Co-op. There's 3 metered parking spaces over there, just 3. So the idea that we would position a kiosk to be in that location to serve those 3 meters, or those 3 spaces, seems to be wasteful. So our recommendation is to take those spots and to just make them free parking regulated at 2 hours. So what's going on in Article C is to take those out of what had been parking meter areas and putting those into limited parking areas. And that would include a couple of spaces there on Canal Street. It would include a couple of spaces on Walnut Street. It would include, I believe, 8 spaces on Frost Street. But it would also include 13 spaces on Park Place, up adjacent to the Brattleboro Common. Now, 13 spaces, we figured, is likely enough to warrant installing a kiosk there. And if the board was more in favor of that, we could certainly proceed in that direction. However, in staff's view, we should probably keep the barriers to park access as low as possible, particularly in light of a transition to a 7-day-a-week regulated parking in town. We just don't think it's a wise idea to put impediments in the way of, maybe parents taking their kids to the park or something like that. So in a handful of areas, we have removed what had been regulated parking spaces and made them fall into the category where they would just be 2-hour parking. And lastly, within Appendix C, I would say that the meters along the municipal center, on the north side of the municipal center on the hill here, they've been gone for quite a while. And so this is a little bit of cleanup, let's say, to help our ordinance match our an actual current activities. So that's what's going on in Appendix C. And then lastly, I would call the board's attention to the fine and fee schedule. And there's a couple of things that I think are kind of important here. Some of these particular prices, as shown, were explicitly discussed at some length at the last 2 select board meetings. For example, raising short-term parking rates to $1.50 was very explicitly discussed. And 55 cents for long-term parking was very explicitly discussed. And for example, raising a basic parking ticket from $10 to $15 was explicitly discussed. But there are a number of different types of parking citations. And so what staff did was to take that direction of increasing the fee, or the fine rather, by 50% and applying it to the other types of parking tickets. So an extended stay, or parking in the handicap without a placard, or parking in a loading zone. And we similarly increased those by 50%. So that's what's being shown here. And while in the last discussion throughout the parking budget, we were very explicit about the increase in the cost to the permit rate for the High Grove, Harris High Grove and Spring Street lot. So rising from $400 to $735, we've applied that same increase to the open permit at the Brattleboro Transportation Center, and at the same time maintained the same percentage difference between the open permit at the Transportation Center and the reserve permit, resulting in the fees and fines that you see here. So I'll just leave it at that, and if the board has some questions, or where would you like this conversation to go?
Great, thank you. Before we even begin,
Yes, sir.
would you do me a favor and put the air conditioning on?
Yes, sir.
Would you do me and everyone else here a favor? I feel like I'm going to turn into a puddle.
Happy to.
Oh, and would you mind bringing some water jugs as well, please? Okay, so thanks, Patrick. Hi, guys. Peter, you had a question, and it might be to Patrick, but why didn't you ask it, and we'll see how we do.
Well, it was going to be like how, for what's being proposed for the 2-hour, for the 2-hour parking, how that was going to be enforced to hold the 2-hour
Yeah.
parking. But, you know, there were just some other suggestions that I
Sounds
wanted.
good. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you. Look at that.
Well, how about that?
How about that?
Thanks, Patrick. Were there more?
Yeah, well, there were just a few suggestions I was going to
Great.
make to the fee structure.
Hey, Patrick, thanks for putting the air conditioner on. Peter has got some questions for you.
So, Frost, Park Place, Walnut, are the going to be free parking with 2-hour restriction? How does that get enforced? So, I mean, what's to prevent me from parking my car on Park Place and just leaving it there for the day?
Yeah. Essentially the same enforcement activity that occurs now. We've got parking enforcement, they're out and about. They have ways of knowing if your car's been there for an extended period of time. Has a lot to do with the location of the, I think it's called the valve stem on your tire. And
They used to mark it with chalk.
pardon?
Didn't they used to mark it with chalk?
So if they, they don't chalk people's tires anymore because they don't want to put their hands on someone's vehicle, but they track the position of the
Valve stem. Yeah.
old valve stem. Thank you. And so if they go through there and they notice, oh, that's Peter's car and it's there at 10 o'clock, and I come by at 12:30 and it's still there, then you're subject to an extended stay ticket.
Okay. All right.
You have some others?
So is now an appropriate time to make some suggestions to the change?
Yeah, why not?
All right. So I have probably had about 36 different parking conversations since our last meeting with a lot of people that I feel represent a really wide body of town, from business owners to people who are using the lots. One of the largest concerns that we seem to have are how people who have employees who come to downtown, who have utilized the parking garage as a fairly inexpensive way of parking, that this pay structure is going to kind of create some problems. And I think if we're speaking into how difficult it is to get decent employees and keep decent employees. So I did a little research, and I was looking at the Elm Street lot, which is virtually empty all the time. I mean, I will go by there at any point in time during the day. Doesn't matter, 4 to 7 cars parked there. I would like to have a place for the downtown employees to park that would be yet even cheaper. And I understand that what's being proposed here is $325. I would like to see that being held to the $220 that it is currently, for the people who are working downtown to purchase their permits and receive a further savings and kind of alleviate some of the concerns for business owners who have employees who park downtown. Also, oddly enough, this came up a numerous amount of times, are the 4 spaces in front of the post office. And liking to see that become also just those 4 spaces free with a 15-minute limit on those spaces. I understand 15 minutes will be a little harder to enforce, but those are at least the 2 suggestions that seem to be the overarching concern from the people I talked to, most of which was, some of which was, why did it take so long to raise the rates? Tried to explain that as best I could. I think I did okay, mostly. But anyway, those suggestions. So just to sum it up, Elm Street lot, I would like to see that stay at $220 so that downtown businesses can park their employees for less and receive that savings, and those 4 spaces in front of the post office free with a 15-minute limit on them.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, so this is a first reading of this ordinance change. I think Patrick kind of walks us through the substance of the ordinance change. What you're suggesting there is going to have a budgetary impact, and I guess we're going to need to run some numbers on that and see implications of that for a second reading.
Sure.
Unless the board wants to say, absolutely do not bring that back. I'd be surprised.
I have some comments about it.
Okay. Do you want to get into them now?
No, you go ahead.
All right. So thank you for this ordinance change. It helps us. It makes things a little simpler. Thanks to Dick for pointing out that, rate changes tied to an ordinance make it a lot harder for us. The schedule, so this schedule, parking fine and fee schedule, not fine fee, because we don't think it's fine, it's acceptable. This is part of our ordinance change, or this is simply for information only?
This is the document that the ordinance now
Yes,
references.
I understand that.
The ordinance points to the town fine and fee schedule and where to find it. And so we brought this along,
Yeah.
although it's not contained within the ordinance.
Town Manager Potter.
So, next time you visit this topic, we'll probably recommend a motion to adopt the ordinance and a motion to adopt your new fine and fee schedule, so.
Okay, fine. And then the only other thing I had was on page 67 of the material. It's a strikeout. Item I, towards the bottom of the page, says the rates in this section shall go into effect on February 1, 2019. Parking rates shall be considered by the Brattleboro Selectboard every 5 years. And we're striking that out. I think that, I've been on the Select Board since that time. And we would look at the parking budget every year, and I don't think we gave real consideration to the rates each year, mostly because the budgets were okay, and then the pandemic happened, and then it was a big who knows for a while. And that's kind of how we're here, and also by a long gap between rate increases preceding 2019. And so I would just encourage my fellow board members, when the parking budget comes up next year, to remember the work that we did this year to kind of make the parking budget whole, but also to remember the ratepayers, and maybe we won't be too eager to change the rates next year unless there's something catastrophic in the budget. And I won't be on the board at that time, but maybe I'll be standing there. So I just want to kind of put a prod in for that. Yeah, every meeting, that's right, John. Board members, other comments? Liz, Franz, sorry, do it the other way around, sorry. Franz,
Okay,
Liz.
mine's quick.
Yeah.
Just on this parking fee and fine schedule, I'd really appreciate having a copy of what everything is currently for comparison. You know, just another identical sheet that's the current values, especially since some of these are new to us today. Just be easier for me to look at it that way.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Elizabeth?
So, first, I just wanted to thank Patrick, because his work is just, it's always wise and in support of the select board guidance, and I appreciate it so much. And in terms of Peter's comments, they're interesting. And I don't really have a problem with the Elm Street lot. Maybe we'd raise it to 250, something like that, just a token change. But I do want to think about the post office, because nobody goes to the post office for very long. And that would be the purpose of the metering, to get people in and out. And much harder for parking enforcement to make those changes. So I think that if we kept the meters or kiosks there, it would keep people running in and out, which they do. I mean, it's a very popular spot. And I don't think anybody stays there for more than, for even an hour. They just come and go. So I think that the metering is the best way to handle that situation, because otherwise I think there'll be issues.
Okay, thank you. Other comments?
As somebody who kind of comes back and forth to Keene, maybe, and noticing that the way they handled their parking, all of downtown is the first 15 minutes are free. You still have to go through the process of plugging your license plate in and doing all the things that I think that we're proposing. They do zone parking, which you could theoretically include Park Place into a zone, so that continues to be paid parking, if that's the way you designated that. Maybe there's a way to designate that. I mean, even though it's a lot of extra work, but to designate those 4 spots free parking, but you have to register when your time's up.
Like for the first 15 minutes?
For the first 15 minutes, maybe just on those 4 spots.
I think that's a good solution, Peter, if Patrick can accommodate that.
If it would be all right with the board, I think the 2 suggestions that Peter had, the Elm Street suggestion and the post office, if I could gather my team together and sort of bat that around and think through that a little bit, and be prepared at the next meeting to speak directly to both of those right up front, that'd be great.
Great, that'd be helpful.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Patrick.
Thank you. Okay, very good. Richard, anything? No? Okay, members of the public who wish to speak on this parking ordinance change, remember it's a first reading, so it's an opportunity to suggest revisions, and then we'll have a second reading in a couple of weeks' time, I'd imagine. So I saw 2 hands. Okay, Penny?
Okay. So, the first thing, I just want to say that in the letter that I am sending to you guys, one of the
I bet BCTV will prefer it if you stand a little more
sorry,
in front of the
go
microphone.
over here.
No,
No,
just
in front of the microphone.
The microphone. So the
Oh,
microphone is
here.
for the
Okay,
people
all
watching
right,
on
yeah,
BCTV.
Sorry, I'm not used to this. Not used to public speaking.
You're
You know,
fine.
in the letter that I am writing to you and sending to you, I just wanted to say, if I can find it, you know, one of the main reasons that my customers are not coming downtown, apart from the panhandling, is the parking meters. And I think you probably know that just about everybody who is a retailer in Brattleboro has got their arms up in horror at the idea of you raising the parking meters. I'm just, you know, that is, if I ask my customers, why are you not coming down? Why are you leaving right now? Why can't you stay to finish your sale? It's always because, oh, I've got to go out and feed the meter. I don't know whether anybody else experiences that. Yeah. So I just want to say that because I know it's not entirely relevant. But I did also just have a few notes that I'd made. I apologize because maybe I missed it from the last meeting, but why are we replacing the meters that we have?
If you have questions, just go ahead and ask them. And
Okay, just go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If we are raising parking meter rates in order to cover this cost, which is the cost of the new parking meters, presumably, right? And I had heard that it was also because of the security at the parking garage that they needed more funding for that. Is that not true?
Keep going.
Keep going.
You've got about
Okay.
a minute and 25 seconds
I just was
left.
wondering, is that part of the parking budget? Shouldn't that be part of security and safety budget? Why is it coming out of parking budget? You know, the money, the funds that we need for the garage, for the parking garage. And by the way, there's no way in hell I would ever park in the parking garage because, you know, if I'm going there late at night, it's just not safe, even if there are security guards. Last but not least, if we do need to raise parking rates, can we please take a more inventive direction on this in order to not further discourage shoppers from visiting Brattleboro? Some suggestions might be as follows. Have we ever discussed having free parking after 4 p.m., particularly in the summer, instead of it, you know, instead of it going until 6? Because I get a lot of traffic at that time of day, and it might also encourage people to come down later into the day, and maybe we could coordinate shops staying open later, because I actually do stay open later on Friday and Saturday. Sometimes I stay open till 8. So that's a possibility, is whether we could have the parking meters, you know, just stop at 4 p.m. when people come down. And then the other thing was, is there a way that we could have, yeah, and we didn't need to do that on every day. You know, you could just do it maybe midweek, not do it at the weekend.
Thanks, Penny.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I can respond to a couple of those, I think. So why the change in rates? We haven't meaningfully adjusted our rates in quite some time. Every year, the select board is presented with a parking budget. The parking budget pays for parking enforcement staff, parking enforcement infrastructure, so buildings, parking lots, meters, that kind of thing, and is paid for by parking fees and fines. And so, wait, Penny, don't talk over me. Could you just let me finish, and then I will give you an opportunity? Yeah? Penny. Thank you. Okay, so the parking fund has been operating a deficit for the last few years, largely because of the pandemic. And so in this year's parking budget, we were asked to consider a rate change in order to fund the parking. Well, actually, we first of all asked a question, did we want the parking fund to pay for itself out of fines and fees, or did we want all the property taxpayers to pay for the parking budget? That was really the option. You know, we could fund our parking infrastructure and staff partially, but that difference, that bit that we don't fund, needs to be picked up somewhere, and it would be picked up by ratepayers, whether they by the general fund, by property taxpayers, whether they use the parking services or not. And so what we did this year was we funded the parking budget by raising rates, fines, fees, citations, in order to fully fund the budget that we need, and actually so that we can make continued capital investments. You know, maintenance, we have a lot of maintenance in that budget that has not been funded well. We haven't really had a capital plan in that budget either. And so that's the summary that I would, you know, provide. And the changing from meters to kiosks and whatnot, we got a really big grant from the state to fund almost all of that. So that's not really a substantial piece of it. It's more about making sure that that budget balances. And as a small business owner, I'm sure, like, you got to balance your budgets. And if you don't, you're in trouble. Elizabeth?
Patrick laid out a lot of problems with the meters themselves, which required change. He might like to say that again now.
Would you like to say the problems with the meters again, Patrick?
I would only add, by the way, I think you're doing a bang-up job.
Thank you. I pay attention.
I would only add that the meters are easily hit by cars. You'll walk down the street and you'll notice, most of them are at some form of angle. Some of those angles are pretty obtuse. The meter heights are all over the place. They're ugly. They sort of clutter the downtown, and they make snow removal particularly challenging and time-consuming. So the removal of the meters and the poles that go along with them is going to, we believe, improve the aesthetics in the downtown and assist with snow removal come wintertime.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. I just want to also point out that you suggested considering free parking after 4 p.m. and whether we'd discussed that. We hadn't. It's an interesting idea. I don't know if we can model something along those lines or not. Maybe that's a thing for next year. I think the really important thing that this board is doing right now is balancing this budget. And we've already made that decision. So right now we need to adopt an ordinance that kind of like goes along with that. This is a first reading of that ordinance. And this rate schedule is going to be a helpful way for us to manage rates on a more regular basis with a quicker kind of turnaround time for when we make decisions. Other members of the public that would like to speak on parking ordinance? Yes, sir. And I'm afraid I don't know your name.
Bill Daly. I'm
Mr. Daly.
owner of the Vermont Country Deli.
Hello.
I'm going to just ask, one, to change Appendix C Regulation, Article 2, Parking, line 129. It goes, it reads on southerly side of Western Avenue from easterly side of William Street to Highland Avenue. I would ask respectfully to change it to on the southerly side of Western Avenue from west side of driveway at 406 Western Avenue to Highland Avenue.
Would you do me a favor and give me a page number if you can?
Sir, that section of Appendix C isn't included in the backup. We weren't making adjustments there.
Okay.
So
I have a picture of
Appendix
the
C
area
is a
that I can give
40-page
to you.
document. I've sort of brought forward the sections that we were making adjustments to.
Thanks.
So we won't find
I'm
what he's referencing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been corresponding with John.
Yeah, I've seen
Otto
your correspondence.
for a week or two now.
Yeah.
And I have a picture of the area that we're talking about, if that helps with that.
Yeah.
In essence, we've been at the deli for 17 years, and my previous owner has been since '86, and there's been a business there since 1800. That section has been parking, and it's white lined as it has been down Western Avenue also for other businesses and residents and that. About 2 years ago, I believe the ordinance came into existence, and I have to defer to John or somebody, and he's been telling me, that parking signs went up there, but no enforcement of it has been happening until about 2 weeks ago when policemen are out there enforcing it. Two things. One is we need tractor trailers to deliver our product, and they use that area to park to be able to unload. So Cisco, other large tractor trailers are there. Two, on weekends, that's relieving a lot of the parking that I know it's an issue and it's a larger issue. I believe that there's a consulting that's going to come in to try to discuss how we can amicably try to fix the situation there. But by eliminating those parking spots, it's exacerbating the situation. And I just kindly, respectfully ask that those be put back to non-parking area for that section. And I fully agree with the police when they park in front of a driveway or up on the sidewalk. You know, I support them giving tickets and that type of thing, but this is just exacerbating the situation right around that area. So I ask that be part of the first reading at this meeting, and the select board consider that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Daly. So you've already received written communication about this, John.
I have, and I know the section that Mr. Daly is talking about, and if you would like us to bring that back in the second reading, we could include that in your next consideration of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Elizabeth?
Well, you know, Mr. Daly's property and that whole area of Western Avenue has been discussed at great length at the Traffic Safety Committee, and I wouldn't feel comfortable acting on an action that hasn't been fully vetted in those discussions that we've had at the Traffic Safety Committee. Daniel, I'm sure you recall that in your tenure at Traffic Safety, this was discussed. So
Yep.
This is quite the issue, and I would like to have it go back to Traffic Safety and be thoroughly explored before the Select Board is asked to act on it.
Okay. Thank you. John, what do you think about that? Is that something that could be done?
Yeah, I mean, we could refer this to traffic safety, and then if you wanted, you could, if there was a positive recommendation there, you could revisit this in August or September, something like that, and just not move forward with it now. That would be an option for you as well.
So
Peter.
would that mitigate what Bill is asking now? Because his concerns are valid. I know that they have done a tremendous amount of work as to trying to control parking as best they could with the side streets and even purchasing the adjacent lot, putting in the store for additional parking. But I know exactly what you're talking about when the tractor trailers come and deliver. So would that impact him if we waited that long? That's I guess my question.
Did you want to speak, Mr. Daly?
We've been to the traffic committee. There are 4 plans that were presented. We've had discussions of this. At no point when the ordinance was first passed was there any discussion with us or the previous owners. So it was, I don't know the history of it, and I can't tell you the history of it. But I'm going to say many of the customers are they're parking there whether there's a parking parking sign or not. Mm-hmm. That's the first piece. Number 2 is we really need that space for the tractor trailers, for deliveries and that type of thing. I'm only asking that this be passed until such time as the consultants, find out what the amicable traffic flow and the end solution, I guess, comes about. Mm-hmm.
So, for lack of a better term, a stay of execution.
Well, now, what we're
it's a first
talking
reading,
about
so.
is Mr. Daly wants to make a change from what is until such time as the broader changes.
That's correct.
But I don't see the problem with keeping it as it is until the broader changes take place.
Mr. Daly, would you like to just speak briefly?
There are lines coming into our, during busy times. It's mostly the weekends or holiday weekends, and there's a lot of parking that needs to be done. We try to defer it down to Memorial Park. We try to defer it down to the market. We try to try to arrange things, and we do the best we can. We're trying to work on a solution with you. And I'm not trying to I'm not trying to be antagonistic. I'm trying to work on a solution. But until the consultants and everybody gets together, there's no solution. This is 6 spots that help our business, help the community. I mean, they're paying taxes into the community too, with the sales tax, the options tax, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to work with you, and let's come up with an applicable solution. But taking away the six parking spots and starting to ticket on those spots exacerbates the situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Franz, you have a question, and then Liz, you have a
Yes,
comment?
I'm
Thanks,
trying
Mr.
to
Daly.
decide whether I understand the issue
Well,
properly.
let's find out. Yeah.
So what I've heard you say is that I think we know that there hasn't been a recent change in the ordinance, so that whatever was happening there was happening either in accordance or not in accordance with the ordinance that we have that's in effect right now. What I'm hearing happened was a very recent change in the enforcement, which is that people had been parking in this no parking zone relatively freely, and that specifically large trucks had been parking there in order to do what they needed to do for your store. But that quite recently, somehow enforcement of the parking ban started, and that's creating an acute problem, particularly with unloading these large trucks. So I guess my questions would be, if that's correct, is there some other way to unload those large trucks? Or is there some feasible way to enforce this parking ban without compromising either safety or the functioning of your business? If there's not, then I think what we have to decide is, whether to sort of go back to the way things were a couple of weeks ago, with turning more of a blind eye to what is contrary to our parking ordinance. Or we have to say, well, that's tough. You just got to do what you can. So, I mean, it seems to me it's a situation in need of a solution, and that there has been a recent change that we're being asked to address, even if that change is in accordance with the parking ordinance as it is. I mean, to me, this is a matter of practicality as much as it is theory of municipal government.
Okay, thanks, Franz.
Can I, 2 comments. One is,
Real quick.
2022, the no parking signs went up. Okay, prior to that, there were no parking signs there. I don't know what the ordinance was at that time. However, there was parking lines in that area for cars to park.
When you say lines, do you mean
those
like,
white lines, also with the hashtags by the
that says no parking, essentially.
by the driveways, so that people would not park in the driveways.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Until 2022.
Yeah.
Okay. Signs went up. I called the Department of Public Works. I said, "What's going on here? Because we have to," and they gave me no remedy. And then, so I haven't been able to get back to anybody at that point. We've been working with the town. I've been working with Steve Barrett. I've been working with Dan Tyler. I've been working with Sue Fillon on the situation, and they've given some solutions, and we're trying to work through those solutions. I've been working with John Potter, too. We're trying to figure this out. The signs went up, and I understand, there's no parking, and you're going to give tickets, et cetera, but that exacerbates the situation. So my piece is to say, let's go back to where we were in 2022 when there was no parking, allow it until we get the solution, and then we get the solution, and we go forward from there.
Yeah, I think that, everyone that's familiar with that intersection knows that this has been a challenging spot for quite some time. And as Liz mentioned, it was before the Traffic Safety Committee when I was on it a couple of years ago. Liz has been on it for nearly 2 years now. Sue Fillion sitting here, she knows a lot about the history of it as well. I don't think we're about to solve it right now. So I think what we need is to continue taking a look at this through the Traffic Safety Committee, to continue with this consultant and to bring forward, a better long-term solution. But in the meantime, take a look at what can be done to help you out, okay? This is a first reading of this ordinance, so I think we've heard a lot of good comment, a lot of good feedback, and I think we need to kick it back to staff now, take another look at, and see what can be done to help you out in the interim, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Dilly. Further comment on the parking ordinance. If it's about the Vermont Country Deli parking, make it real brief. Okay, great. If you just identify yourself, and then we're going to move on after this one.
Yeah, I'm Shelby Brimmer, Brattleboro. We own Martucci's and the building it resides in. So I have lots of thoughts that I can express to you guys in a outside of here about how we got here and decisions I think you guys made prior to this meeting that I don't necessarily agree with, but that's a topic for another time. So just about what's on the plate, on the table today. As someone who employs people and has tenants and has to try to attract tenants to live downtown, where I have to also walk people out of the alley who are trying to relieve themselves and then bring the tenant back and say, here, see the apartment. The idea of increasing the parking, I really don't care about the parking meter prices. I think the kiosks are gonna be great, and I think passing on the cost to the people coming for shorter periods of time or just being mostly tourists or people who are coming just for a couple of hours, I think that's great. Those need to go up, that's fine, no issue with those. My issue is really with the rates for the parking garage and the other paved lots. 50% increase on something, I don't know anyone who's received a 50% increase at work or who hasn't experienced increases in expenses across the board on a number of other things. And I think 13 years of not preparing for the fact that things were gonna cost more one day and not raising the prices on those permits is not the people who are gonna have to pay this. It's not their fault. And the parking fund's separate from the general fund. I get that you guys decided not to merge them, but it's already, the general fund's been picking it up the last 4 years anyway, right? 4 or 5 years since they've not been paying the difference.
No.
We've just been at a deficit, so the money's just been coming from.
We had ARPA money that we put into the parking fund to make it whole
Okay.
a couple of years back.
So the money did come from the general fund.
No, it was pandemic money,
Okay.
ARPA money.
Federal money.
Yeah, federal money.
So this would be the first year that if the parking fund doesn't pay for itself, it would come from the general fund, in theory, or potentially have to.
Not this year, but next year
Next
would be
year.
quite bad. This year, you
Okay.
would just about manage.
Okay. As somebody who also pays property taxes, I would much rather see a slight increase, practically nominal increase in my property taxes if it meant that the people who were living and working downtown didn't have to bear the brunt of this overnight. I understand if you want to keep the parking fund separate, you have to raise the prices over time, but a 50% increase is insane. Something like a 10% increase or a 25% increase over years to get to a better place is fine. People can budget and plan for that. I know plenty of people who live and work downtown. Those are my friends. Those are people who work for me, people who live in our buildings. This will be a shock, even if you warn them. People don't have enough money right now to budget and plan, and you're going to ask them to come up with a lot of money that they don't have to pay for a year or a quarterly parking pass that's doubled. And I don't understand how we got here, but we're here. And I think that a lot of property owners, they're already annoyed about property tax increases, but if you figured it out when you guys presented if we introduced or if we pulled the parking fund and put it in the general fund and stopped having parking altogether, that's the most extreme case. I'm not even saying that. But I figured it out, and I think it would cost me as a property owner $160 a year if you had done that. And that doesn't mean if the general fund had to pick up the slack a little bit. That's if there was no revenue from the parking fund and the town just had to pay every expense to maintain all of that. So myself, I would only have to pay $166 or something for the entire year. But you're asking all of the people who already live and work downtown, who, quite frankly, it's practically a public service that they're continuing to do so. I say that as someone who's doing it myself. I'm really excited about downtown, but I don't want to have people be discouraged to come live and work downtown. I don't want my job to be harder trying to get people to be excited with me. And I think that will do that. It will massively deter. I mean, we're practically just going to sell Paul's truck, so we don't have to park it in the parking garage because we also pay for we personally pay for it. We literally save money if you put in our property taxes, so I'm a little biased. But
Thanks, Shelby.
But yeah, so just please consider a much slower progression of this rate increase, not on the meters or the individual, but on the actual permits. And then on a side note, I would be curious, as you guys are looking into it, what the occupancy is like how many permits are sold per lot and how many are not being used.
Yep, thank you.
Because just maybe some.
Yeah, and I appreciate your comments. They're important. I understand where you're coming from with all of them. The parking budget has been adopted. We had 2 meetings about it. We did receive substantial public input from it. And so what we're looking at here is an ordinance change, and then, as John mentioned, we'll be adopting a fine and fee schedule at a later date. It's possible that there's some, changes that could be made to that fine and fee schedule, but the board made a decision to fund the parking budget with fines, fees, etc. The increase to property taxes would not have been what most people would describe as nominal, and so we did not go down that road. But that is not to say that that couldn't change in the future, but this cycle, it's kind of a done deal, okay? So we're going to move on. This is a first reading. There'll be a second reading, an opportunity to revisit that ordinance, make any final changes, and then adopt it. But right now we're going to move on to new business item B, which is the political sign policy. And our town clerk, Hilary Francis, and planning director, Sue Fillion, are going to present to us. And I'm going to do a really good job this time of making sure that I set my timer and that when you have comments, you address them to the select board, and I will then project them over to these folks here. So, Sue, Hillary, talk to us about political signs and what our policy is on them.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for being here.
Let me just get my notes out.
Thanks.
So the town has had policies around political signs for a while. And then we would oftentimes get questions from the public, from candidates. And so last year or 2 years ago, we sort of revamped our political sign policy in town. And we got some feedback from some candidates that there were some of the aspects of it were questionable. And so we heard that feedback and we looked into it and recognized that we may have taken a bit of an extreme interpretation of what statutes and statutes and state policy said. And so we looked further into it and we revamped it again, and that's what's before you. The Secretary of State's office suggested that we bring our policy to the select board and have you all sign off on that. So it is very much so in line with state policy, state statute, what we have. The major things that I would call out, the major aspects of this new policy are just sort of clarifying that political signs cannot be posted on town property. So that includes our parks, that includes our facilities and road frontage. So you think of the common, you think of the municipal center, things like that. If it's private property, somebody's home, you need their permission to post a sign there. There are places where private property and town right-of-way overlap. So think about the area in front of somebody's home between the sidewalk and the street, right? That green area, that's where it overlaps. And that area, you would also need the property owner's permission to post a sign. But then there are town right-of-ways, like the islands. Those areas you could post, and one of the reasons why it's important for us to bring this to you now is because you're allowed to post political signs for the 2 weeks leading up to an election. August 13th is the next election, and a lot of candidates are eager to get their political signs out, not just on private property, but in those public right-of-ways. So we're bringing it to you and hoping that you will sign off on it, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Could we start with a motion, please? Elizabeth?
I move that we approve language regarding the placement of political signs on public property as presented. And I
Great.
have a question.
And Liz has a question. Maybe you'd like to speak to the motion as well?
Exactly.
Knock yourself out.
Hillary, the one question that I have is, with early voting being so prominent, does election day have the same meaning that it did in the past?
My understanding is yes, and that has come up before when we were dealing with charter change law and things like that, where it said X number of days preceding the election, and we got advice from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, from the Secretary of State's office, from our town attorney, and all agreed that election day is election day, and it's not the start of election season.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Other questions from the board? Franz?
Thank you, Daniel. So those candidates who had problems with this over the past couple of years, I will reveal that I was one of them, maybe the main one, I don't know, but certainly I did raise the issue. And first of all, I want to start by thanking you for taking out the phrase "no man's land" so that that no longer appears in these pages, because that was a particularly confusing stipulation. However, I don't think this clarifies things adequately. Specifically, the distinction between town property and town right-of-way is not, I mean, you just clarified it a little bit by saying, well, the traffic islands are town right-of-way. I don't know whose property they are, but it seems to me there could be confusion based on that distinction if it's not adequately delineated. And in fact, I would say that one way to do that would be with a map and actually show people, you can do it here, you can't do it there. Another aspect of this, though, is enforcement. And there are places that I put my sign 2 years ago, my first time I got elected. I saw there was a beautiful sign, and it was just where Guilford Street starts, and then it butts up against the park and makes its left turn there. And there was a terrific sign advocating the candidacy of Peter Fish Case located there. So I said, well, that's good. I put my sign there, and that was fine. Both signs stayed there the entire duration of the campaign. But then last year, I put my sign there, and boom, it's gone. And I had to collect it from the Living Memorial Park shed because it was decided, no, that was town property, and I couldn't go there. However, at the same time, there were commercial signs in the same locations where my political signs were, and my signs were taken down and the commercial signs were not. And I'm not against the commercial signs, but I think it's an absolutely fundamental legal principle that political speech is protected more than commercial speech, not less. And I think if you go down to the covered bridge right now, you'll find signs advertising one of our fine financial institutions in town that are exactly the places where my signs were taken down a year ago. So to me, this is still a very problematic issue, both in terms of delineating the specific places where signs are permitted under this, and then also, I guess it's not you guys particularly, but there needs to be thought devoted to, what happens to all signs? And I'd be in favor of more signs, not fewer signs, because I think they serve a purpose. But I think that, just adopting this doesn't solve all the problems. And anyway, that's my take on the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
I want to just ask you a question. So are you looking to make specific changes to this policy?
I guess so. I mean, the specific change I would advocate is for it to somehow include the distinction between town property and town right-of-way in a way that people like me can understand and respect and act in accordance with.
Great.
I think there are other aspects of the question that also need to be dealt with.
Okay, thank you. Sue?
In terms of a map, we can provide a map of the town facilities and parks where signs cannot go. I think I could confuse you even more about right-of-way, and so I am not really doing a map would take a lot of research into where the right-of-way actually is. So with the way that we handled it with, if it's in front of somebody's house kind of thing with a green space and a sidewalk, like you need that person's permission. I think there's going to be the other places like at the bottom of Union Hill, and there's kind of that you could stick a sign within the 2 weeks before. That's probably town right-of-way. Right-of-way is just tricky. We can do a map of where you absolutely cannot have them.
Okay.
And then anything else, if it's blocking visibility, it's going to get picked up.
Daniel.
Okay. Peter?
Because that's another piece
So,
of it.
yeah, a map is good. I don't think it's incumbent. I mean, honestly, as somebody, it's clear, by the way, who the favorite was. Just gonna say
Who
who the favorite was. I'm just putting that out there.
Let's see,
So
if I can
anyway,
recount the vote
moving
totals
on.
from that year.
I mean, I'm sure this is a great conversation.
So,
for us to have right
but
now.
I think a map is fine. I don't think it has to, like, where you put your sign. I think if you're in doubt, if you have to stick that thing in the ground and wonder, gee, is it gonna be taken or not? I think it's incumbent upon whoever is running to stop and ask the question, maybe delay it a day. A map is helpful if it's easy just to put black Sharpie going this, wherever there's Sharpie, you don't stick your sign is fine. I don't think this thing has to be like labored. I'm fine with the policy as presented. Maybe the addition of a map is nice. That would prevent a bunch of unnecessary phone calls. And again, if you're in doubt, just stop and ask somebody. And if you ask a property owner, they're like, well, that's town property, then you have to go to the town, or you already have your answer.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Elizabeth, Richard? No. I felt like it was a reasonable policy, and I kind of felt like I understood it. I did ask John, like, hey, when we say town right-of-way, what exactly are we talking about? So maybe a little more clarification on what that is, some examples. I know that maybe the list an exhaustive list might not be possible,
See what we can do.
But then I guess if it's not really feasible to produce an exhaustive list, then perhaps the enforcement should also kind of like have a little leeway as well.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming best intentions that people thought that it would be okay to put a sign there in this 2-week period.
Wait until we start having a 1.5 rod road conversation.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Is that helpful? Do you want to
I think we can do a map.
push back on any of
Yeah.
that?
We can certainly pull together a map like Sue suggested. Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like a map is all we really
Yes.
need here.
Elizabeth?
I just want to say is once again an example of the department heads working together and departments working together, and I appreciate it.
Good. Thank you.
Sue's a good partner.
John's writing me a note. John, yes, I know. I remember them. Don't worry. The public, what would you like to say on this matter? Mr. Hallett, you're recognized in more ways than one.
Hi, Oscar Heller, Brattleboro. So I was someone else like Franz who was confused last time. I went through this ahead of time and tried to, as if I was reading it with no background.
Mm-hmm.
I still find it kind of confusing personally. And this is even having gone through the clarifying last year. Like, for example, I'm still not sure. So town right-of-way that does not front town property is okay. Is that, for example, a traffic island? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
John, did you want to? No?
Sorry.
Sue, yes.
Sorry.
So a traffic island is okay
As
in
long
the
as
2
it's-
weeks prior to an election.
And if it's town right-of-way and not state right-of-way, it's not allowed in the state right-of-way. So
But,
that might mean that
is
some
there
of the
I
other
feel like we
ones
need a
where
map.
exit, it sounds like we
Right?
need a map.
And as long as it doesn't obstruct visibility
Right.
for drivers.
Okay. Mr. Heller, real quick.
Yes. Two other things. One general thing, I think I wonder if it could be worded in a way that was a little more conversational and sort of like, I think it's a confusing topic, so something that was more along the lines of, you can post your signs here, here, and here. This area is ambiguous. Here's an example of what is okay and what isn't okay. Something like that. As there's some sort of legalistic bits in here that are generally a little hard to get through. So the two specific things, real quick. So I'm not clear, the section on signs at the polling place, it says the presiding officer can prohibit various things, and then in Brattleboro, this is prohibited. Is that meaning that the presiding officer has the authority, and in Brattleboro, that decision has already been made?
Yes.
Okay. And so this means for future elections, you cannot put a sign in the ground in the like candidate zone at the polling
I
place.
think it says, I reread this today, and I think in there it said, further down, for election day, the presiding officer can adopt a policy to allow handheld signs and signs to be placed in certain areas, so long as the policy is applied evenly to all candidates. The presiding officer can limit size. Signs must be removed from the designated campaign area. I read somewhere in here that it did allow for campaign signs in, I'm not seeing it right now, so I need to read it. But in that designated area, we do allow them in as long as they're removed by the end of election night.
Okay, and then last
I need
thing,
to find that again.
the section 2, the state statute section, I know it's annoying.
This way.
But this is, well, whatever.
This
It is-
way.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, I thought you were saying wrap up, sorry.
No.
So I am, having read this really reads to me as if state statute says that every temporary political campaign sign cannot be displayed for more than 2 weeks. I read it, is it intended that that means only on town property? Because if I read section 2 all the way through, it looks to me like state statute says signs can only last for 2 weeks. If so, a lot of signs for the primaries are going to need to be pulled like tomorrow. So,
No, that's not right.
but okay, it doesn't
So,
read that way.
if you have a sign right now on private property, that sign can stay there until whenever, provided the private
August
property owner
14.
is fine with it.
So section 2 starts with on public or private property, ... bulleted list of things.
Huh.
So we don't need to resolve it, I'm just calling it out.
Yeah, thank you. Boy, I was really hoping we were going to adopt this policy as presented, but I got a feeling we might be adopting it as amended, or even not adopting it. And that would be a troublesome thing so close to an election.
It would be.
Yeah. I feel like everyone's asking for a map and a little more clarity on where in some plainer language. I understand state statutes in here and that needs to be in its statutory language, but do you think that you could amend it with a map and some examples in time for it to be useful?
I don't think I can do it for your next meeting because I'm on vacation next week, so.
I'm just
If it can
gonna stand on pretty firm ground that I think a map is a reasonable amendment, and it becomes incumbent on the person who is running to find out where signs can and cannot be placed. I think.
Let me ask you a question then.
Yeah.
So if a candidate were to come to the planning office and say, hey, I want to put signs here, would you be able to say yay or nay?
Yes.
Okay. That's good enough for me for now, and like maybe a future iteration of this document can have a map when staff have capacity to do so. Board,
That
good with
works
that?
for me.
Okay, so Liz made a motion earlier. I know, I see you. We got so much more that we need to do.
Seems like there's language that isn't what people thought it was.
Do you want to come to the microphone?
Yeah, sorry.
Real
I know
quick.
probably nobody else cares this much and it's not that important, but if this is the thing where we're fixing it. It feels like there's language about public and private in section 2. There's language around signs in the candidate area at election day that is not, that people think is there, that isn't, that the wording, people thought it was town property only, but it says public and private. This is stuff people are going to read for the first time with none of this context, and this is a problem I have, so that's all.
Okay, let me just check in about that statement. So this is a brand new policy, or this is a document that people have been given in the past?
This isn't updated.
Right,
From
that's what I thought.
what we've had in the past.
Okay. So I'm gonna just read section 7, political campaign signs at the polling place on election day, and check my understanding. The presiding officer, that's you, Hillary, right?
That's me.
Can prohibit all signs from being placed in the ground or affixed to anything on the property of the polling place. Can. In Brattleboro, political signs are prohibited from being placed in the ground or affixed to anything on the property of the polling place. However, the presiding officer, Hillary, cannot prohibit a person from standing and holding a sign, we've all done that, outside the polling place so long as the person remains in the designated campaign area, right, which Hillary always makes available, and does not hinder or impede the progress of any voter going into or out of the polling place. So I read that, and it says, if you're in that taped off zone, you can have as many signs as you want. If you want to put signs outside of that zone at the polling place, they're not going to be allowed. Is that your understanding?
No, but
Okay, come to the microphone.
I really don't want to.
I just want to resolve it. We've
Okay.
got a lot on
Here,
the agenda.
If, based on what I'm understanding from what Hillary and Sue were saying is the fact, that section would just need to say, the sentence before that says, you cannot put a sign in the ground anywhere on the polling place. There would need to be an exception in that next sentence that says, within the candidate zone, you can put a sign in the ground, or you can hold a sign.
That is what it says.
I don't think so.
Well, regardless of what it says, that's what we've always done.
If I may,
Hillary.
it does say, in Brattleboro, political signs are prohibited from being placed in the ground or affixed to anything on the property of the polling place. However, the presiding officer cannot prohibit a person from standing and holding a sign outside of the polling place, so long as the person remains in the designated area. So the however is speaking to holding, not to putting it in the
Okay,
ground.
so
So I
And
think
that's-
that we can just say, however, the providing officer in Brattleboro cannot prohibit a person from standing and holding a sign or placing a sign within the designated area.
Okay, so how about that?
We can certainly amend it to say
Yeah,
that if.
that seems like an easy
I'm
amendment to make.
comfortable with that. If that
Great.
clears it up, does that clear it up for you?
Yes, the only other question is number 2. Are we saying in the first sentence, the intent is that it should just say
Wait a
on
second.
public property, comma, instead of on public or private?
That's state statute, and I think we need to look that up.
Okay.
And I don't have the state statute
Yeah.
in front of me right now. So we'll need to come back to that.
Again, to me, it's just a candidate's question. It really kind of boils down to it for me.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of us don't need signs.
So there's been one amendment that is very clear. We're going to have, it's a standing and holding or placing a sign in the designated blah, 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 right? And that was understood. Would you accept that friendly amendment?
I certainly would, Daniel.
Good Lord, thank you. Do we need to vote on my friendly amendment?
I think we could just vote on the whole.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's amend it.
All right.
See if it passes.
So, board, we have a motion in front of us to approve language regarding the placement of political signs on public property as amended. All those in favor?
No, there's more discussion.
Okay, let's have the discussion.
Well, I'm going to have to vote against this
Okay,
because I think it's still not clear. And Oscar has brought up a couple of things. And, you know, the language of the state statute is really in question. This whole thing, I don't think this is the most important topic that comes before us, but I think if we're going to do it, we should do it right and not adopt it because, oh my God, you know, we've got a primary coming up, and then put something in place that still needs a tweak here or there. I'm in favor of getting it right so that it says what it's supposed to say. It doesn't, you know, I think a map would be really useful, but it doesn't have to be part of it right now. But I think the language does need to be clear and accurate. And that's why we're doing this, is to get it clear and accurate, and it doesn't make sense to do it and have it not completely clear and accurate.
Okay.
So that's how I intend to vote on this motion.
And
Thank
I
you.
would.
Anyone
I would-
else wants
I
to
would
speak on
push.
that?
I would push back a little bit, that no matter how clear and accurate we make this confusing piece of whatever we're doing here right now, that it will still conjure up questions. Again, so I think the amendment to the language is fine. I think having the candidate, it be the candidate's responsibility to find out where their signs can and cannot be put, and a map, and we put this thing to a vote and move on. That's right where I feel. I think everything that's been presented tonight is fine. I'm hearing what Oscar's saying, but again, I think just putting this back and putting it off another 2 weeks and then putting it off another 2 weeks is just, we've already spent what I consider something that we should have been discussed for 10 minutes and put, and been in the rearview mirror at this point. We've got other things that we need to talk about that are more pressing and important. And I'm not knocking that this is not an important issue, but I think the amendment, putting it on the candidate to find out where their signs can be put. You're running for political office. It is your responsibility. A map would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Richard or Liz?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the changes that have been made as an amendment.
Okay. Liz?
Me too.
Okay, all right. So we've got a motion on the floor to approve language regarding the placement of political signs on public property as amended. All those in favor, please raise their hand and say aye. Aye. That's 4. All those opposed, raise their hand and say nay. Nay, that's 1 against. Passes 4-1. I'm going to move on to fiscal year 2025 property tax rate. And no, we're going to take a break after this.
Okay.
Kim Frost is going to come up and present on this, and then we'll take a break. This should be fairly straightforward, because if we want to amend any of this, we're in all kinds of trouble. Thanks so much to Hillary.
Thank you, Hillary.
Oscar.
Thanks.
Kim.
Good evening. Hi. So the good thing is that state statute requires that the select board set the rate, but every decision has been made, so that's a good thing. So we made the decisions earlier this year at RTM when the budget was approved. The grand list was lodged in June. These are the 2 numbers that make up the municipal tax rate. Then at the end of June, early July, we find out what the educational tax rate will be. And then the end result is what we are presenting to you in the memo tonight. So the homestead tax rate, which is combined municipal and education, increased about 7.82% from last year. Putting this into dollars, because that's the best way for everybody to understand, taxes will go up $245.70 per 100,000 of assessed value. $62.20 is the municipal rate, and $183.50 is the education rate. So that increase is split. 25% of that increase was the municipal rate, and 75% of that increase was the educational rate. The rest is in the memo. That was just like a quick summary, if you have any questions.
Thanks, Kim. So, board, we have a very long motion for this item. Would somebody like to make it?
I'll make him.
I gotta see if Franz wants to make it. You've made a lot of motions, Liz.
I'll be
Motion
happy
hog.
to make this motion. Motion is to approve a municipal tax rate of $1.4540 per $100 of assessed valuation, which includes $1.4527 for general fund operations and $0.0013 for the local agreement, an additional $0.13 per $100 of assessed valuation for the downtown improvement district, an additional $4.0573 per $100 of assessed valuation for the Mountain Home Special Assessment, and to ratify the state mandated education tax rates of $1.9356 per $100 of assessed valuation for homestead properties and $1.7928 per $100 of assessed valuation for non-residential properties.
Great. Thank you for reading that motion. Any discussion on it?
There's nothing to discuss.
There's really nothing to discuss. What happens if we don't approve this?
You know, I have no idea. I
Yeah.
think it's all set in motion already.
Yeah.
Let's not tempt things.
That's
Yeah.
Members of the public who wish to speak on this matter, Mr. DeGray.
It means the tax rates will go up.
Yes, but that would be a problem because then we can't fund the government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Victor Gray, Brattleboro. I was at the forum last night for all of our legislative candidates, and they were asked about the school tax rate. And sadly, none of them gave a definitive answer how to get this animal under control, which was quite disheartening. 13.5% increase is unsustainable. You talk about a $180 increase, and the school tax rate on a $100,000 house. That's just ludicrous. A question I have is because we haven't gone through a town appraisal, and I think it's going to start next year, our town appraisal. How is that affecting our tax rate? That, what's the word I'm trying to think of? I just had it in my head.
Common level of
Common
appraisal.
level of appraisal. How's that affecting us here with our tax rate at this point?
Well,
Are
at
you
this
finished
point-
with your comment?
Well,
Yeah, keep going.
I was wondering, I think because we haven't had a evaluation in 10 years, 12 years, it's having a significant impact on us, and our appraisal won't be done until 28, I believe, or 29. So there's a significant price to pay for us not doing the appraisal on the 10-year mark when it should have been done, and that was a board decision and or a town manager decision not to push that forward. And hopefully that, and some of you have been here, and I think may have asked for that, and wondering why that didn't happen and why it took so long to get it to happen. Because it does have a significant impact on our taxes.
Thanks, Dick. So what we're trying to do here is adopt this tax rate. Questions about townwide reappraisal, I think, are interesting. With the town assessor not being in front of us, I don't know if Kim would really feel that she could answer that. I don't know if it's entirely germane. I can't answer it, that's for sure. So I think your comment's interesting, and hopefully we can get some information on the reappraisal later on for you.
I would just offer
question?
Dick a chance to come and talk to me about the common level of appraisal later. My understanding is different from what you just said, and in fact, I look at it as a correction that's made because we haven't had the appraisal, not an additional tax burden on the town.
Okay.
So let's talk about that offline.
Great. So we're trying to adopt the municipal tax rate here, property tax rate. Any further discussion? Okay. Board, are you ready for the motion? Do I have to read the whole thing again?
No.
Crikey. I'm gonna. Okay, so Franz made a motion to approve a municipal tax rate of $1.4540 per $100 of assessed valuation, which includes 1.4527 for general fund operations and 0.0013 for the local agreement, an additional 0.01300 per $100 of assessed valuation for the downtown improvement district, an additional $4 and 0.0573 per $100 of assessed valuation for the Mountain Home Special Assessment, and to ratify the state mandated education rates of $1.9356 per $100 of assessed valuation for homestead properties and $1.7928 per $100 of assessed valuation for non-residential properties. All those select board members in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes 5-0. Thanks, Kim. And we're going to take a break for 5 minutes. It is 8:16. We'll come back at 8:21. robots from BCTV, I guess we're good, so we'll just, we'll get back to it.
There's people controlling those robots.
They're not, actually. No.
What are they? Is
The
it
robots
really?
are controlling them.
They're like AI, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna resume. Thank you. Next item is new business item D, which is adoption of Select Board 24 to 26 priorities. We held a retreat, a goal-setting retreat on June 13th at the Winston Prairie campus. It was an all-day event. We heard from town staff, and then later on we spent the afternoon, well, the evening, sharing big ideas and trying to arrive at consensus on which of those ideas that we wanted to focus on this year. And Sue Fillion, you facilitated that event. Would you like to give us a little summary?
Sure. Yeah, so I'd asked each board member to bring kind of their one big idea for kind of priority that they wanted to work on for 2025 to 2026, fiscal years, I'm sorry, I should say. And then we discussed some other ideas that came up. So the big ideas that came from the board members were revenue sharing, basically having the state give us more money in recognition of the hub town kind of issues. Expanding recreational trails, particularly things like the Whetstone Pathway, and making use of kind of our waterways and having trails with them. The community safety, advancing community safety, which had been a priority from last year, doing more on that. Child safety zones, which also came from the past year, but no progress had been made. And no increase in the fiscal year 25 tax rate. And then there were lots of other discussions, other ideas, before we narrowed it down to, five that board members ended up kind of voting on. And the voting was designed to be voting on each priority and your excitement of working on that or moving that forward. But in the end, it kind of worked out where there were a couple of top ones, and they were finding a path forward on community safety, child safety zones, and revenue sharing. And then the next two vote getters were create sober living and recreational trails along the rivers, determining feasibility and planning for them. So we're bringing before you a recommendation to have the following three priorities kind of guide the work, which is finding a path forward for community safety, developing the concept of child safety zones, and enhancing revenue sharing with the state.
Great. Thank you, Sue, for that recap. For folks for folks who weren't Oscar, because Oscar attended the entire day, you can watch this event on BCTV. It was a public meeting. It was also all day. And I reviewed the tape just the other day for my own reasons.
Did you really?
Not all of it, but the latter half. So if folks want to hear the discussion that went into these ideas, that is available on the BCTV video library. So, board, the motion in front of us tonight is about adopting these priorities, and I just want to point out that there's a slight typo. It says to adopt the following 25, 26 priorities. It should say 24, 26. So, Select Board, somebody want to make a motion? Kick this off?
I'll motion,
Peter?
as soon as I find it.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. I'll motion to adopt the following 2024-26 Select Board priorities of community safety, child safety zones, and enhanced state revenue sharing.
Great, thank you. Discussion on that motion.
Works for me.
Okay,
I'll discuss it.
France.
So, I mean, for me, well, first of all, the things named in this motion are important priorities, and I think we should pursue them. I also think that looking at the list of the other suggestions, there are several that I think are equally important. Others that may not be quite that level of importance, but still are good ideas. And I think we should be looking for opportunities at least to make those other things happen as well. And we discussed that at the retreat, and there was support for that. But, you know, I just want to emphasize how the list that we've been given includes things that I would dearly love to see happening in our town, and that I'll still be looking for ways to make those things happen when the opportunities present themselves, and allocating resources to make those things happen when possible.
Great, thank you.
Fair enough.
Other board members, Richard.
Yes, and along the lines of what Fran said, just because something isn't in the top 3 of the list doesn't mean that we can't pursue making those things happen through other channels and through working with townspeople, and, you know, and I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Great, thank you. Further comments?
I think, you know, it is, to Franz's point, to Richard's point, I mean, it is incumbent upon us. Most of these we all agree on, but pretty much one of us only brought it up, right? And then we got board support on all of these things, and brought them up and prioritized them in a list in which we'd like to see. We did the same thing the following year. I will speak to child safety zones and repurposing how our downtown spaces are used, and how we can create a difficult space for people to be difficult in. That is one of my priorities. And in the first year that it was my priority, 0 happened. Now, why did 0 happen? Maybe because I wasn't loud enough and push. This year is different. I'm taking a more proactive role of making sure that the agenda is moving forward. I've been working with John and other department heads to see what we can feasibly do within those child zones. So I think, to your point, some of these other things that are here, and I know that, like recreation trails along rivers and things like that, and bike paths and things like that, and I think we discussed this in the retreat as well, are things that we are currently working on, and I want to see that work continue. I think by prioritizing just 3 things puts this board in the best chance to move forward, have big successes, and so I'm a big fan of advancing those 3 as our priorities. But to your point, Franz and Richard, not forgetting that there are other priorities here that we would also like to see. I mean, we should be able to do more than 3 things at once.
Great, thank you. Other members of the board who wish to comment on this item? Okay. Members of the public? Ms. O'Connor?
Kate O'Connor, Brattleboro. You're not going to be surprised when I say this, because I sent you all a memo prior to your retreat. And I'm disappointed that budget, fiscal responsibility, and affordability are not on your list. To me, that should be the #1 priority of you as a select board. As we just heard when Kim was here, town taxes are going up 4.4%. School taxes are going up 10.5%. The 10.5% would be higher, but the school district chose to use $3 million in contingency funding to lower it. Part of that was surplus funding, but it also included a 2% across the board cuts in all the schools. So I think not putting that on your priority list sort of puts it out there where you're going to forget about it. No, you're going to tell me, oh, we're not going to forget about it. But it should be on the top of the list. Also, in that whole realm of the budget and affordability, needs to be a thorough, open, public budget process this year. I think those go hand in hand. So as somebody who thinks this is the #1 thing, I'm disappointed that it's not on your list. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. we did have quite a discussion about a proposal to have no increase in the FY25 tax rate. I'm not going to rehash that whole discussion now, but it was a real consideration, and what we ended up saying, I see, was, hey, that's not going to be one of our priorities as such, but I think John and Patrick heard us quite clearly that we wanted that budget to be as lean as possible this year, and we're gonna see how that shakes out, I guess. Franz.
Thank you, Daniel. I just want to point out that that's actually an incorrect statement of the proposal. It was for no increase in the FY26 budget. I mean, we're already in the
Okay.
FY25 budget. So
The next budget.
yeah, so we're in for the subsequent budget that I had originally proposed no
Okay.
tax rate increase.
And, yes. Okay, so other members of the public with comments on these select board priorities that we're hoping to adopt this evening? Yeah. So come up to the microphone, tell us who you are, and then you've got up to 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm Sueña LeBlanc. I live in West Brattleboro, and I'm very happy to see community safety and child safety zones on here. I'm not exactly sure what they mean, but I hope they include bicycle safety and bicycle lanes. I am a cycle commuter. I bike 99 out of every 100 days here in Brattleboro year-round, and it can be pretty terrifying sometimes. On a daily basis, there's microaggressions of just drivers not understanding what it feels like to be a cyclist. I have a cargo bike. I foster children. They ride on the bike with me, and people are careless, outright rude, and sometimes very dangerous. A friend of ours got hit by the Creamery Bridge recently. I've been hit by a car, not in Brattleboro, but I know what it's like, and yet I choose to bike. I had an incident on a place that on our town map says has a nice bike lane. It's on William Street. Paint is not bicycle infrastructure, so there's pictures of bikes, and on our map it makes it look like we have this nice safe road to ride a bike on. I rode with my 10-year-old foster child from New England Youth Theater rehearsal to the softball field for a softball game about a month ago, and was terrorized by 3 young drivers. I have been afraid to ride my bike on William Street since then, even though it's the safest route for me from downtown to my home in West Brattleboro. I was riding, I had a 10-year-old on my bike, and right up 2 motorcycles, so scary, right up on our butts, and then zoomed around, followed by a car. So there has, some people are talking about maybe a one-way street on William Street and making a nice, fat bicycle lane for people to get from downtown to West Brat to this, the parks and the municipalities there, the pool. I see kids, I work up at Winston Prouty, that sidewalk is trash. You can't walk 2 abreast, and it's a 25-mile-an-hour zone. Nobody's going 25 miles an hour. I hold my breath at several of those blind turns every day. And I would really like to see some real thought. I appreciate that people tried hard on those West Street bike lanes, but they're not safe. I think they've made things worse. And that's what I'd like to say. So hopefully cyclists are on community safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Other members of the public that would like to speak on these priorities, either in the room or on Zoom? Okay. Board, are you ready to adopt these priorities? Sounds like it. All right, so Peter made a motion to adopt the following FY 24 to 26 select board priorities: community safety, child safety zones, and enhanced state revenue sharing. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, that passes. We have adopted those priorities. Now we will get to work on them. Next up, Thanks so much, Sue.
Thank you,
Thank
Sue.
you, Sue.
Next up is committee vacancies. We have some appointments to make. At 5:15 this evening, we held interviews for the Development Review Board. And at the time, feels like a long time ago now. I got him right here. At the time, we interviewed Tom Mozakowski, Alison Gauthier, and Keith Maxwell. There were 2 vacancies. Keith Maxwell withdrew his candidacy, so I feel like, board, we could probably go ahead and I'm going to propose that I'll nominate a slate of Tom Mozakowski and Alison Gauthier for the Development Review Board.
Would we do the
And?
alternates separately?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lump it all into one.
Well, I'm going to do that just now. Thank you. So we've got Tom Mozakowski and Alison Gauthier for the Development Review Board. Any other nominations? No? Okay. So we'll vote on them. All those in favor of appointing Tom Mozakowski and Alison Gauthier to the Development Review Board, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It passes 5-0. They have been appointed. Keith Maxwell indicated he would be interested in being a Development Review Board alternate. Any other nominations for that position? No? Okay. All those in favor of appointing Keith Maxwell as a Development Review Board alternate, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 5-0. Keith has become an alternate. Tree Advisory Committee we're going to take up at our next meeting. And CPCC. And that is it, my friends. So I'll take one final motion.
I am motioning
Okay.
to adjourn.
Peter has
You
made a
have to
motion
form-
to adjourn. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thanks BCTV, town staff, members of the public, interpreters, the select board.
I didn't hear a second.
We don't
Doesn't need to be
second.
seconded. Come on, man, you've been to enough of these. So, wonder if we'll ever find out the mysterious